Good morning.
Good morning.
Today is July 11th, 2023. We are in Pensacola, Florida at the Pensacola Public Library. My name is Donovan Carter with the Samuel Proctor Oral History Program. And today I'm conducting this interview with
Asha Clarke,
Kenny Tinoco,
and Lorena Manasturean.
And today we're interviewing the lovely
Jocelyn Brown.
Thank you so much, Ms. Brown, for joining us today. Our first question we're going to ask is, can you tell us a little bit about yourself, about where you're from, when you were born, a little bit about your family?
My name is Jocelyn Brown. As I mentioned, I am a native Pensacolian. I was born on January 16th, 1981, to Dorothy Brown and Fred Riley at Sacred Heart Hospital. I live in the neighborhood called Inslee on the northeast side of Pensacola near Ferry Pass, and my family has been in Pensacola since 1946.
Wow. Wow. Now, do you have siblings, or did you grow up with siblings?
I'm my mother's only and my father's only daughter out of 7.
Wow. The only girl.
Yeah.
It must have been nice for you in that house.
It was just me and my mom.
Okay.
Yeah.
Wow. Do you, and what do you do now?
I am a music supervisor for television, film, and advertising. I also run a music publishing entity, International Anthem Publishing, with my business partners, David Allen and Scotty McNeese. IAAHP is actually based in Chicago, and my music supervision and licensing consultancy is based here.
Wow. That's really awesome. I'm going to ask a question. Just can you spell your name for us for the record?
Sure.
Sorry.
It's Jocelyn, Michelle with 2 L's, and last name is Brown, like the color.
Okay. Wonderful. Thank you so much. So how did you find yourself in the music industry? Do you perform?
I do not perform. I cannot sing a lick. I sound like a sea lion. But I've always had what I would like to call auditory memory. I've loved music since I was a toddler. It all started with the Miami Vice theme song, of all things. And my mother picked up very early on the fact that I could know a song or knew a song and could name it within like the first few notes. And she was amazed by this. The rest of my family was amazed by this. I still, to this day, don't know how that happens, but it happens. And I'm just able to remember all these arcane facts about music. I loved reading liner notes in albums as a little kid. Or like those little CD booklets that told you who everyone was, what they did, what the lyrics were, when the album was made, which studio it was recorded in. And for some reason, as a little kid, I was able to file all that stuff away.
Wow.
And there was no useful purpose for it until I found myself in this line of work.
So, can you talk a little bit more about how maybe music has been a part of your life as you were growing up? Did you ever?
I mean, it's a constant. It's funny that we're conducting this interview at the public library because a lot of my discovery of music took place here. My love of reading emerged out of libraries, and I've always associated music, one, with the moving image. Back to the Miami Vice thing, there's this opening title sequence where, you're hearing Jan Hammer's Miami Vice theme, and you're seeing all these little photos relative to Miami life. You're seeing a highlight player, you're seeing a speedboat, you're seeing a flamingo. All of those images for me kind of stacked together and helped that memory along. The same way little kids in preschool play that game memory. That's how I relate to music, and that's also how I began to relate to music video on MTV. And all I did after school, from about second grade until well into my college years, was watch MTV. Hours on hours of MTV. Probably not the best thing for you, that and BET, but you know, it had a purpose. We just didn't figure out what that was until almost 2 decades later.
That's so awesome.
Yeah.
So you say it starts with kind of the Miami Vice kind of opening sequence for you. What are some other, I guess, films or television shows or even songs that you kind of relate to your...
Oh, wow. There are a couple of different moments like in my childhood that I can pinpoint that like struck me musically. There was a family that babysat me, and they were a family of Jehovah's Witnesses with 3 teenage girls. And these 3 teenage girls were disconcertingly hip people. And they would sneak me into their bedroom. They had this tiny little record player. And like, one of my first early memories of listening to music was being huddled around this portable turntable and like listening to Prince on a very low volume. This was not this particular song that day, but like Prince's Pop Life was one of the first like 45 singles that I got. And I remember my mom asking me why I liked it so much. And I now know that this was the bass on that song, but I was like, I like it because it sounds like a rubber band. And I remember her laughing at me so hard when I said that. So I was like, what? It does sound like a rubber band. Other songs, Sly and the Family Stones, Family Affair. I remember us being in the car and we were running an errand and this song came on the radio and I was like, does his voice sound like that for real? Like, is that his actual voice in real life? And my mom's like, well, yeah, but he's able to shift it and you hear, that's him. That's the same consistent person throughout the song. And my mind was completely blown by that. I'd never heard anything like that before. Obviously Parliament Funkadelic, you know, gotta give it up to George Clinton, proud Floridian. They're America's greatest rock band. I'll say that over and over, and they are a rock band. I don't even know how you try to classify that. James Brown was like a detonator bomb in my world as a little kid. Another band that blew my mind as a little kid, and I remember this so cleanly and so clearly, and it really was kind of foundational to the way that I think about music supervision and licensing. Depeche Mode. The first time I saw Enjoy the Silence was the day it appeared, you know, as a world premiere on MTV, and you know, you hear the MTV News thing with Kurt Loder, come on. And I remember very clearly him saying, this is a world premiere by Depeche Mode, Enjoy the Silence. And you see this guy in his robe and his crown. He's walking across like this very bright, colorful landscape. And it goes from like grassy fields to snow. And he's still wearing this very regal robe. And then you hear Dave Gahan's voice come in and you're like, what? Who is this angelic person? Where do they make people like this? How do I become part of this sound world? And I might have been in 4th or 5th grade at the time, but it was over after that. I wanted to know everything I could know, and around that time you get Nirvana, Sonic Youth existed in the Parallax. You've got Rage Against the Machine, all these other bands that kind of came up, and it was just this instantly accessible wormhole for me into this side world of music that had nothing to do with R&B or pop or freestyle, which is what I'd been listening to previously. And even thinking about those musical through lines, big exposure to regional music through the roller skating rink, right? You've got regional hip hop, you've got regional freestyle, you've got different DJ and club mixes, and you know, I'm out there 7, 8 years old trying to keep up with my cousin Denise and shuffle skating on a Friday night, right? But I'm hearing all these different musicians like DJ Magic Mike, I'm hearing Kraftwerk, I'm hearing Fonda Ray's Heartbeat, and these were things that, unbeknownst to me at the time, were popular in other major parts of the United States, and that would get to become important later on. So I had a pretty broad musical education, and I'm very lucky, in my home growing up, media was not censored. My mom used her discernment, but by and large, if you're a Florida kid, period, you're hearing Two Live Crew and Luke. I don't care who you are, wherever you go, at some point, you're going to hear it. So there was no point in her mind of trying to censor any of that because she couldn't control what other people did with their cars passing by or what I'd hear in public or in other places.
And by Luke, do you mean Uncle Luke?
Yeah, Uncle Luke, Two Live Crew, Poison Clan, that whole thing. Yeah.
And could you speak just a little bit more about Pensacola's rich musical history and that's influence on your sound world, as you put it, which I love.
Yeah, it's really crazy to think about Pensacola relative to a music city, because my understanding of Pensacola as a music city happened entirely before I ever even got here. We are literally sitting right up the street from a neighborhood called Belmont de Villers. And that neighborhood was Pensacola's Black Entertainment District. There's a historian here. Her name is Robin Richard, who could probably tell you a significant bit more about that. But there were two clubs in particular that I think about when I think about Belmont de Villers. There's Abe's, ABE apostrophe S 506 Club, and then there is the Bunny Club. And I've only ever heard these stories secondhand because I wasn't alive yet. This was where my parents went. This is where they hung out. And to hear my mom tell it, if you went out at all during the week or on the weekend, you made the loop. You went to all your other little places around town, but you were going to come through that neighborhood at least twice just to see what was going on. And she's told me that she's seen people like James Brown come to this town. I think James Brown played the Municipal Auditorium, which is what used to be Bayfront Auditorium, I believe. People like James Brown, Parliament, just lots of different people coming through here. And it would take her to rattle off the names of those acts. But I remember when she was just going through the list of people that she had seen in this town, my mind was completely blown and shook that any of those people had a reason to show up in Pensacola, let alone on as frequent and regular a basis as they did. In that same neighborhood where Five Sisters sits now, there used to be a record store called Gussie's Record Shop, and that was kind of a central hub for Black Pensacola. That was where you went and bought those new records. Upstairs from Gussie's was a radio station, WBOP, and that was like the local Black radio station. My mom has also told me that you could pick up certain radio stations from Nashville here on the AM dial, so she would hear different things from there too. But hearing these stories and hearing her tell me about all the shenanigans she and her friends got into, all of the different things that would happen on your average night out, hearing my dad's tales about different things that would happen on a night out, that kind of sparked my imagination, as a young kid of like, man, what is adult life, nightlife like? Like, I want to know what that's about. And it was clear to me that music was another through line into that. Trying to think of what else I know to say relative to Pensacola's music community. So the Pensacola Civic Center has been consistently a major rehearsal space for large musicians before they launch a world tour. I didn't know that until I was a little kid, and we learned firsthand what that really looked like and what that meant. So unbeknownst, at least to me, when Michael Jackson staged his Bad tour, he did his practice runs in the Civic Center here. And once that wrapped, I guess Janet Jackson had recorded Rhythm Nation 1814, and she was looking for somewhere to rehearse, and she brought that here. And as a thank you to the people of Pensacola, Janet Jackson did a dress rehearsal show. Those tickets might have been $10. They sold out within 16 minutes. And God bless my mom. I don't know how she did this. To this day, she got us tickets. And that was my first major live show. And I still remember how excited I was and most everything about that show. So
Wow.
There's a history here.
Yeah.
It's a secret hidden history. I will speak to one level of history relative to Pensacola's music scene that I'm very sad to say I never got to be a part of. And I was old enough to remember. I should have been old enough to go, but this was kind of the point at which my mom was cracking down and being strict. We did once have one of the best independent music venues in the Southeast called Sluggo's, and it was on Intendentia Street. Bands like Pavement came there to play. Lots of underground indie rock bands came there to play. That was where you went in Pensacola. If you didn't go there, you were playing this really sad little venue behind what used to be Builder Square in Town and Country Plaza called the Night Owl, or you were playing at the Handlebar. But Sluggo's was kind of the main situation. And by the time I was old enough to be able to go and, didn't have those parameters on me, Sluggo's was gone. It was closed. So there you have it.
So I want to ask, you touched a little bit about kind of your parents, stories that your parents would tell you about Pensacola nightlife, wanting to make you become more interested and more involved, especially, noticing the music being a central part of that. How have their tastes in music perhaps influenced yours? Like, do you know what did your parents listen to that you were really fond of? Because I know similar. I have older brothers, and I grew up in Atlanta, and hip hop was big for us, for instance. But what were some things that were some songs, for instance, or records, or things that you think of when you think perhaps of your parents, and like how those influence your taste today?
Obviously, Motown is huge, and like the great intergenerational balm of music. That was just omnipresent, throughout my childhood from every adult in my family, aunts, uncles, grandparents, mom, everybody. My mom very much is in that R&B, soul, and funk zone, and she very much encouraged me to listen to whatever I wanted to. One of the main constants in our home when I was small, and to this day it's still a huge comfort to me, was Frankie Beverly and Mays. When I hear Frankie Beverly and Mays to this day, it puts me back in this space of like us being at home on a Saturday, doing chores, cleaning the house, putting groceries away, doing our Saturday routine. My mom worked full-time and went to school full-time at UWF. She worked in the Office of Community Outreach. And so she was gone, and I was with my grandparents the majority of the time. And so Saturday was our day. Like, that was the day where we had a regular routine. We had a regular home life. We had things that we did, and part of that was going to the record store. Turtles Music and Tapes. That was our spot. She'd get a record, and sometimes I'd get like a book on tape or a 45 or whatever. We'd do the grocery shopping. We'd go home, put that record on, and just do our chores, do our thing. Like, that was a place of safety and comfort for me. My dad's musical taste is very varied. And I have to say, while my dad was not in the home, like, I grew up talking to him. I knew where he was, he's around. And his interests always veered outside of what was normative. So like, you might get some rock or soul or folk or, world music in there from my dad, whereas my mom was not veering into any of that at all. And I didn't know this about my dad until much later, but we had a lot of experimental music in common. And he would buy music magazines and have subscriptions to music magazines from other places. Some of them were mainstream, like Rolling Stone. Others were from underground places. And that, to me, explains a lot about my love of music. But dovetailing all of that, all of the adults in my life saw that I had an interest, and they took an interest in my interest and encouraged me to develop that interest. That number one was the key thing. One other thing I want to say is that I was very much encouraged to like go into my own and find my own pathway with that. My mom, for a very brief time period in the 80s, took an evening job at Radio Shack, and I hated it because I just wanted to go home at the end of the night. I didn't want to be with my grandparents all day. But she's like, look, I have to do this one way or another. If you can be cool, there's going to be a surprise for you at the end of this. And I remember I agreed to it, but I didn't like it. At the end of this time period, she's like, I got a surprise for you. And I was like, surprise. And she comes out with this boom box, and it's this dual deck boom box with like these removable speakers that I could move. Literally, they were on a speaker wire, and I could move them around the room. And she showed me how to use both those tape decks to make mixtapes. And she showed me how you do that from the radio. She showed me how you can record your own voice over things through this little tiny speaker hole. It was over after that. Wow. So I very much felt like I could be an active participant with music, even if I didn't have an instrument of my own, even if I couldn't sing a lick. There was still a way to actively participate in this world that meant so much to me.
Yeah, that's amazing.
Yeah.
So I want to come back to that a little bit more later. I do want to, hear more about the types of things you may have created then. But I want to touch back on something you mentioned before. You mentioned like the roller skating ring and how you were exposed to regional music from other parts in the U.S. Mm-hmm. So first question, do you still skate?
Not as well as I used to. But yes, I do have my Riedel roller skates.
Can you skate backwards?
I can't now, but I was the queen of it when I was younger. And I'm trying to get it back. I'm trying to get all my old moves back. Like, I want to shuffle. I want to skate backwards. I want to shoot the duck. I want to do the bubbles. But I'm old. 31 years has passed between my heyday and now. Like, there's flexibility that used to be there that is not there anymore.
No, I understand that. So what was an average Friday at the skating rink like? What did it look like? What did it sound like?
I mean, I think about songs like Nucleus's Jam On It. I think about Cybertron's Clear. I think about, Kraftwerk and, Trans-Europe Express. I think about 95 South, Whom's There, 95 South, There It Is. All these different songs. Some of these songs are regional songs that I couldn't tell you what they are, but there was one by DJ Jimmy called Where They At. Now, Beyonce picked up on this song, and it showed up on Renaissance, where it must be the Stamps because it ain't your face. And I was like, because as soon as I heard that, it snapped me back to like being 8, 9 years old and being in Dreamland roller rink on a Friday night, Saturday afternoon. And I was just like, okay, so what we were hearing here, they clearly were hearing in New Orleans, in Houston, and that's kind of diaspora crossing across the South. Same thing when you think about Miami bass, when you think about, Uncle Luke and the Two Live Crew universe, all of that stuff made its way clear through the South. And there's a universality to it to such a degree that friends of mine who grew up in places like Louisville or Nashville or Winston-Salem all know these same songs. And these are not black kids, they're white. Okay? So they're that universally omnipresent throughout a Southern kid's world. And don't even start with like Goody Mob and Outkast. Universally beloved, much beloved. But, how deep do you want to go? There's a whole rabbit hole zone there. And if you have 50 cents to $1 and you know where to look for these records, they're still out there. I say that there are record collectors who have picked up on all of this, and they're buying those records from our parents, from our grandparents at a pittance and reselling them for hundreds of dollars. And that is a zone that I later kind of tangentially found myself occupying just through friendship. And I'm very much on the outer fringes of that, I should say. I'm nowhere near as deep as most record collectors in the United States. For me, it's just a casual passing thing versus these people who have very specific clothes they put on, gloves, masks, and they're going into damp, moldy basements and staying there for 3 or 4 days at a time to look through everything. So yeah.
Well,
it's a thing.
Absolutely. I'm going to get back to that later too. But I want to ask about your dual deck boombox and about, your first mixtape.
Oh God.
Sorry, I'm going to write this down real quick so I remember to come back. Your first mixtape, the first thing you created, do you remember?
No, because I was doing them that often. I don't remember. I can tell you what my favorite grade of cassette tape was, and I can tell you which radio stations I was listening to. But what was on those tapes and where they've all disappeared to, I don't know. I couldn't tell you.
Okay.
If I think about era, I can probably tell you who probably ended up there. Expose's Let Me Be the One was a very big song for me. Bananarama, Cruel Summer. Milli Vanilli's Girl, You Know It's True. Like, I'm dating myself here, but this was like my elementary school listening world. Kathy Dennis, like All Night Long, that was my jam. That was my cut. I love that song. But also, you get into things like Jodeci, you get into Tevin Campbell, Mary J. Blige. All of this stuff, for me, was a thing. I loved Club MTV, so like dance mixes of all this stuff were omnipresent and everywhere. CeCe Peniston's Finally. All of that stuff was kind of, innocent elementary school zone for me.
And how long were you making these mixtapes for? Just in middle school? Did you stop in did you stop in middle school?
No.
You kept going?
Kept going.
Yeah.
Once you get hip to the fact that you can make tapes off of the radio and give them to your friends, well, you do that and you trade. Hopefully you find other people who are into those same things. But after a while, I realized my interest in music was very nerdy compared to what other people in middle school and high school were doing. And I kind of kept that close to the vest, That was my thing. That was not everybody else's thing.
Yes, so how did this eventually, I can see the music being a through line kind of throughout your life and being important to you and to, not only your passing of time, not only how you pass the time, but how you perhaps relate to different stages in your life, right? And music does it for many of us, but I wanted to ask how it came to be that you ended up working in the industry. How did that?
I'm going to do my best to make this brief. It's not a brief story, but I'll do my best. In my 2 weeks into my senior year of high school, we had to move to Tallahassee. Throughout a number of different reasons, my mom was no longer with the University of West Florida, and she was in year 29 of a 30-year work history, 30-year pension plan situation. You don't just quit working for the state. But state jobs in Pensacola were hard to come by, and none of them were really paying the salary that she was earning. So we had to go to Tallahassee so she could keep that going, make the money she needed to make, get me enrolled in college early, because that's what ended up happening, and finish out her pension time. And so off we go, and I'm kicking and screaming the whole way and being in complete and total pain. I'm embarrassed when I think about this now, because I had no idea what she was going through. And it was clear to her that I didn't know. But this speaks to how cool my mom is and has always been. She said, look, I know this is hard for you. You're a good kid, you're doing your best, and I really didn't realize it was going to hurt you this much to do this. So within reason, find 2 things that you want to do that don't have anything to do with Rickards, which is where I finished high school, or Florida A&M, which is where I was doing dual enrollment. She's like, find 2 things to do for fun within reason, and I will make it happen. And I was like, are you serious? And she's like, yeah. Find 2 things you want to do, go off. And off I went. So there's very much this whole side history of news weeklies, right? Alternative news weeklies. They're kind of like the little tabloid sections that you would see in your newspaper, like a Friday supplement or a Sunday supplement that kind of outline local nightlife, music happenings, upcoming concerts, or whatever, what have you. And I knew I wanted to be a journalist. I thought I wanted to be a newspaper editor. That's why I ended up at Florida A&M. I ended up as a student in the J school at FAM. And they had this little section called Teen Democrat in the local newspaper, the Tallahassee Democrat, and it was a column written by a very small group of teenagers at the time. And I was one of the people who was chosen to be part of Teen Democrat. So I would go to the newspaper 2 days out of the week. I'd spend my 3 hours worth of time with the reporter learning the very basic stuff about journalism, rules, ethics, things of that nature. And one of our reporter mentors in this program was a woman named Mariel Betancourt. And Mariel also was the editor of the local news weekly, Break, at the Tallahassee Democrat. And somewhere in there, I got up the courage to ask if I could be their intern, and she said yes. And that led to me doing CD reviews and tagging along to concerts and doing concert previews or reviews, and shadowing the entertainment reporters at the Democrat and getting to know that world a little better. So I'm 17, 18 years old doing all of this stuff. Shouldn't have been allowed in a venue, but I was there for work purposes and I could prove it. And that also coincided with one other thing I wanted to do. Mariel was a volunteer at Florida State University's college radio station, WVFS. And she's like, you have a preternatural interest in music. You should really think about applying to work at this radio station. And, as all kids do, you move to a new town, you're looking for your station on the radio dial. And I remember hearing a sound like I'd never heard before, and it just piquing my interest. And it turned out that it was that actual station. I later found out I was hearing this band called Stereo Lab, and they'll get to be very important too as part of the story. And so, I'm listening as a casual listener to this radio station, and they announce this thing called a cattle call. I'm like, what's a cattle call? And apparently at Florida State University, you don't have to be an FSU student to volunteer at that radio station. If you live in the surrounding 3 counties and you can make the time commitment, you can apply to work as a member of the radio station. I don't think I've ever figured out how to do something so fast. And I told my mom about it, and she's like, you say there are older people here at this station? And I was like, yeah, there's a professor who's a station manager. She oversees everybody's activity. They'll train me, blah, blah, blah. My mom drops me off. I go upstairs to the cattle call, and they had this thing called the record cover test. And they show you 15 different albums. But now, any identifying characteristic on that album art is gone. You can't see the artist, you can't see the artist name, album name, even on the spine, or any of those song listings on the back. And they want you, out of this group of 15 albums, to identify at least 2 things: artist name, personnel or band members, or at least 2 of the songs on the album, or the record label itself. And you had to get a significant number of those right to be hired as a DJ. And I got 13 out of the 15 right. And to my knowledge, at that time, I was the second youngest person hired at that station.
Wow.
I think I was 17 then. The youngest person to be hired, he was the host of the ska and punk show. His name was Skew, and he was 13 years old.
Wow.
But yeah.
Cool.
And I ended up being at WVFS from 1998 to 2003. I was there for 5 years. And for me, being turned loose in that catalog room, it's exactly what those little kids on Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory looked like when they got turned loose in the candy room. That's literally how I felt with that catalog room. I would sneak in there on days when I decided to cut class at FAMU and just go in the catalog room and like pick out different things and like read those CD booklets and like learn all stuff because I'm that much of a nerd. Sorry.
Well, that's really cool. But can you tell a little bit about what you were doing
From there?
Yeah. Like what did your day look like there? Like what you talk about being in the catalog room? Were you?
Well, so like when you there are a couple of different things that happen. But I was part of the announcing team. I was a radio DJ. And my first shift was a Saturday morning, 6 to 10 a.m. Now, again, speaking to how cool my mom was, I don't know any working adult who pulls 40 hours a week in an office job who wants to get up at 5:30 on a Saturday and do anything. My mom woke up at 5:30 on Saturday mornings, got my teenage self out of bed, put me in the car, and dropped me off to do that radio shift. And she was there when I got done at 10 a.m.
Wow.
She did that for 2 years. But she did what she said she was going to do. Did the Saturday morning, 6 to 10 a.m. for 2 years. Then I did, by then, my mom had moved on. I was in college. She was retired. She's like, I'm out of here. You're in school. Peace. Hold down the ship. And I was working full time at the Florida Bar Association at this point, like helping to enter attorney complaints and learning how to be a legal secretary, among other things. But I had a half day once a week. It was Wednesday, and I did the Wednesday afternoon, 4 to 7 p.m. And then I would fill in on any shifts that needed to be filled in wherever I could. And in my very last year there in 2003, I was 22 by this point, they gave me the spot everyone wanted. They gave me the Friday night 8 to 10. And that's the window that you get when everybody is getting dressed, getting ready to go out, getting ready to party with their friends. And it was wonderful. It was a lot of fun. But what you do when you're there, you have a couple of different things that you have to do at the top and the bottom of every hour. So at like the o'clock hour and the half hour mark, you have to do the station identifier to comply with federal regulations. So you have to give your call numbers and either the station identification number or like the station tagline. So you'd hear me say, you're listening to the Voice of Florida State, WVFS Tallahassee, 89.7 FM. And then you might have like a news block where like you transfer over to two people who are reporting local news 10 minutes before the hour. Or you might have the traffic report, campus traffic, right? Mm-hmm. Those were the things that you absolutely had to do. And then at 10 to the hour, every other hour, we did the concert update. So there was always a weekly listing of all the concerts that were playing around campus. Most people don't know this. FSU had a venue on campus called Club Down Under. And as part of your student activity fees, you're paying an entertainment fee, right? All those little entertainment fees, they get shunted off into a budget, and the people who ran and managed Club Down Under, it was student managed, student run, they brought the Donnas, the White Stripes, Spoon, all these different bands, and I saw all of these bands that went on to become huge. I don't think I ever paid more than $10 for a show. Most of the shows were free. But if you had to pay, you were paying like $5 to $10. I remember there being one kerfuffle where somebody came and we had to pay $15, and I remember being like, that's ridiculous. Well, welcome to the real world now, where you might pay $60 to $300 to see a show. And I got to do that for 5 years straight. So again, another type of musical education. But that's what I did at V89.
And with it being a university radio station, were there like a wide variety of music, like the different concerts, or?
Everything. I saw everybody from Cool Keith to Yo La Tengo play in that 5 years. I saw everybody. I saw Wilco, I know. Who else did we see? It's such a blur, I couldn't even tell you, because literally 2 or 3 nights out of the week, every week, going to shows. Endless.
And from what you remember, the student crowd at these venues, at these concerts, was it kind of the more hipster indie kids who were checking these bands out, or was it a thing where the general FSU or Tallahassee student population were coming to view these artists?
I mean, it was mostly students, but those shows were open to the public. So if you were like an older aging 40-something punk, you could go to those shows too. If you were on the FAMU Marching 100 and you wanted to see De La Soul, you could go too. Like, it was open. You know, all of those shows were advertised in the local newspaper and treated as if they were open to everybody. So you would see a fairly good mix of people there, but almost to a person, our entire radio station would just go to shows. And it was a fun time because it, you know, relative to me having had the interest that I had, I was now in this situation where I was with roughly 60 other people, 60, who across all age groups were as interested as I was. And I also lived in a town that had one of the best record stores I've seen to this day, RIP, Vinyl Fever. So I was spoiled. I was really spoiled. And I could do all of this with no money. It was amazing. And that led me to my next path in life. So around the year 2000, we all know what happened. The election. You've got George Bush, Al Gore, hanging Chad drama in the state of Florida. And I was still working as a news assistant at the newspaper at the time. You know, as a news assistant, you're working at the front desk, you're fielding calls from the general public, you're typing obituaries, you're laying out the weather page, the crossword page, all this different stuff. And at this point, I was the cops and courts news assistant. So after 8 p.m., and between 11 p.m. when my shift ended, my job was, or part of my job was to turn on the police scanner and listen to the scanner. And if anything major was happening and one of the reporters was not there, I was to call them. It was my job to call them. And, you know, part of that, when that election happened, if there was election news, you went to the Capitol Bureau one day a week, where, you know, the person who reported on Capitol business, you know, the legislature, everything else, they worked out of that office to be close to all the different offices within the state capitol and report on different political goings on. Being in that environment, when the election happened in the year 2000 and there were hanging chads and Katherine Harris's office was deleting disenfranchised people off of the voter rolls, yes, this happened. It was a lot. And that particular story, the Katherine Harris story, was a contentious one. And when I saw how that was treated in terms of news, I was like, this might not be the profession for me. As much as I love it, daily news being influenced by the whims of corporations relative to what can and can't be reported, that's not what I thought this was. And I'm understanding now that that very much is what it is. Independent news, unbiased news, it doesn't exist. And I know that now because of media literacy training. But at the time, that realization leveled my world. It broke a childhood dream. And I was like, well, if that's the way it's going to be, I may as well go and do what I want. And I had the presence of mind as a 22-year-old. I'm like, what do you want, bro? What do you want? What in your wildest dream, if money, if time, if other people's input were of no concern to you, what would you go and do? And I was like, well, I'd go figure out how to run a record label. I want to go do that. And once I pinpointed that interest, there was no wavering from it. Now, it was clear, like, I had to go do that thing, at least just to satisfy that level of curiosity. You know, being in your early 20s, you don't have anything to lose from going and doing that. You have time to catch up if it turns out to not be the thing. And everybody at the radio station, where I made it clear, I was like, I don't know where I'm going to go, though. Like, New York, I know I'm not built for, and LA just seems like some whole other planet. They're like, you're going to Chicago. And I was like, what? Oh, and they're like, dude, every bit of music you play, for the most part, comes from a record label in Chicago, one way or another. And I had to stop and think about that and cop to the fact, that's actually true. All of my favorite record labels are in Chicago. You got Touch and Go, Thrill Jockey, Drag City, Hefty, Chocolate Industries. Those are my big five, and they all were in Chicago. There was all a significant amount of overlap and collaboration, and what was going on at this particular time was interesting enough to me that I didn't understand what they were doing, and I was curious about it. So it made sense to go and figure it out. I ended up, through my internship at this News Weekly, doing different CD reviews. And I had done a review of this album by this lady, Via Tanya, Tania. And it was called Under a Different Sky. And I wrote the review and went on with my life. And I was able to do that review because there were extra promo copies at the radio station.
Sorry, this was in Tallahassee still?
Yeah, still in Tallahassee world. I was able to get an extra promo copy out of the music office at the radio station and do this review and submit it to the newspaper, and everybody was fine with it. And I'm like sitting there doing my, legal assistant job or whatever, and I get an email out of the blue from this publicist, this music publicist. And she puts me in touch with this person, and it turns out the person was the person who founded the record label, and he saw the Via Tanya review and wanted to strike up a friendship, and we did. And I got home from work one day, and there was a voicemail on the answering machine. Now, this tells you how long ago this was. Cell phones were not ubiquitous yet. We're still dealing in the age of the answering machine. And he'd left a voicemail letting me know that one of his artists, this gentleman named Diverse, was coming to town to open, I believe it was for Mr. Liff and LP, and I should come to the show. And I remember I'd gone home, I'd checked that answering machine, and I had like a brief window of time.
We have another person when you're done, okay?
I'll hurry. We had a brief window of time before I had to go take my last community college exam, because I'd been kicked out of FAMU at this point. Journalistic depression. Anyway, and I was like sitting there in front of the Florida Capitol. And I'm like, you can go left and go take this accounting exam that you know you're going to fail, or you can go right, go home, change your clothes, and go to the show. And I thought about it for 30 seconds. I literally cut across 4 lanes of traffic and went home and went to the show. And that show changed my life. I badgered that record label person into giving me an internship. 4 months later, I moved to Chicago. That was the only person I knew. I had no money. Literally moving then turned into 18 years. Wow. And in that 18 years, I worked at that record label. I worked at Hefty. made a lot of friends who worked in that music community, and they all encouraged me, one, to learn how to DJ, which I was able to do thanks to one very kind friend. His name is Cortland Green. He worked at Records and was a buyer. Thanks to a very amazing bar and venue that no longer exists called Danny's Tavern. And thanks to Chicago's entire independent music community, all of whom went to that same bar, all of whom very kind. I saw record labels started in that room. I saw marriages form in that room. There are children running around that came out of first dates in that place. And it all has collided with my life. The way that I became a music supervisor, I left Danny's Tavern. I went to a bar literally 1 block away called the Charleston, where they let me DJ every other Saturday. So I had 2 Saturdays out of the month. My bar manager at the time was a lovely woman named Chanel Pease, Pease. She was in a band called Pulse Programming back in the day. And she called me. She's like, hey, my friend's moving back to town. He needs a music supervisor. What are you doing? And I was like, this could be some kid at Columbia who wants me to do music supervision for their student film, and I don't know how to help them, or this could be real, and I could figure it out. By this time, I was working as an admin assistant at Northwestern. And I was like, I don't know. But something in my gut, I was like, email Chanel back, you dummy. Has she ever steered you wrong? Write her back. I wrote her back, and as soon as I saw that email address extension come through, I was like, oh, snap, that's an ad agency. That's real. And the guy calls me back, and I go in for an interview, and we just sat there and talked about music for 4 hours. And at the end of the 4 hours, he's like, all right, well, I'll see you in 6 weeks. And I was like, huh? And he's like, you got the job. I'll see you in 6 weeks. And that's how I became a music supervisor. And I'm now 14 years in the hole. I don't work for that ad agency anymore. I did go on to another ad agency, 2 other music production houses. COVID happened. I was laid off. And my mom encouraged me to do 2 things. She encouraged me to start my own company and do this work on my own. She's like, you more than know how to do this. It's fine. You should consider moving back to Pensacola. And I was like, well, what's in Pensacola other than y'all? Meaning my entire family. I was the only one who was not here. Literally, my entire bloodline is here. And she just explained to me, she's like, for the amount of money that you pay in your place in Chicago, you could rent your place, pay that mortgage, and live here essentially for less than your grocery bill in Chicago. I did the math and I saw that she was correct. I'm able to do what I love. I can pick and choose the projects that I do. And it's been a wonderful respite. But this also sees me getting on a plane once or twice a month, flying to Atlanta, Chicago, New York, Los Angeles, wherever I have to be. But I'm able to come home, and guess what I mean when I say home? That same childhood home that I grew up listening to all this music in.
Wow.
And it's gratifying.
Wow. That's amazing.
Yeah.
I have a couple of questions.
Yes.
A couple more questions.
And I'll try to be brief. I don't want to take up everyone else's time.
Don't worry. So when you say you learned to DJ, just mostly DJing, like at the bar, would it be like parties or like, and how was it different from perhaps what you were doing on the radio?
So I will explain Chicago bar culture a little bit, and it's really funny to think about this. It gets so cold in Chicago, and this was true when these bars were built in like the 1800s, 1900s, because you will look up and you'll see a Schlitz globe with the date that bar was open around the Schlitz logo. Fun fact. Every residential neighborhood in Chicago had a tavern, right? So you'll be in what looks like a normal residential neighborhood, and then there's just this brick building, and it's a bar, smack in the middle of your neighborhood. Literally, all 77 neighborhoods in Chicago have at least one tavern, and there's usually several. Danny's was one of those such places. There was no indicator that this was not a residence other than the neon Schlitz sign out front, sticking out of the building. And that sign is not there anymore. But it just looked like a traditional Chicago apartment building. And when you walked in the door, in what would have been the living room, there was a bar and there was seating. And then you go up 2 small steps and there's a dance floor. And off of the dance floor, there are 2 bathrooms. And then there are side rooms where you can just sit and talk and gather. For my time and my dollar, that was the best bar in the world, and gentrification and family real estate ruined it. It closed at the beginning of COVID. Being in a residential area and being as immensely popular as it was, the residents on the street wanted it out, and it survived. It was there for a good 30 years, but pushed it on out. In this bar, every night of the week, you'd hear some sort of music programming. It varied. There was a reggae night, there was a house night, there was like R&B Quiet Storm night, freeform experimental night, but it really depended on whoever was doing the bookings that week. There were poetry nights, there were readings, there were small venues or small shows there that were recorded live to tape. It really was a community center of sorts. And for my part, I like to play everything as long as it rhythmically keeps people on the dance floor dancing and moving. You might hear me play Cameo. You might hear me play the Schlitz. If it works, it works. And that's the sort of DJ I was. And that's the sort of DJ most of the people in this room were. But when I tell you, musicians would come in there and DJ, regular people came in there to DJ, and it was just fun. It was just fun. It was a sort of situation, and I like to tell people this, specific to one night called Sheer Magic. Sheer Magic was the longest running soul night in North America, helmed by the aforementioned Cortland Green and a gentleman named Dante Carfagna. And it has its origins in a soul night that started in Detroit, but that's a longer story that we won't get into here. Sheer Magic was the longest running soul night in America. When you hear all these old rare soul songs in TV shows, know that it came out of this room in Chicago first. And they were doing this in 2003. They were doing it well before I got there in 2003. And on the first Wednesday of every month, if you weren't in that line by 10:30, you weren't getting in. It was that packed. And the first time I ever went in there, it was literally like what my teenage self thought about relative to what is adult nightlife like. Hearing my parents talk about Abe's 506 and the Bunny Club, I never expected to find myself in a situation that was exactly what they told me it was like. Door open and all this humidity and steam comes out, and I'm like, whoa, what's going on? I can't even see. Are there people in there?
Glasses fog up immediately.
Yes, and you walk in there, and as your eyes adjust, you see people, and you're seeing people from every walk of life. Old punk couples, people out on a date night, kids who say they're 21 but are very clearly 19 and have no business in there, Eastern European gang dudes, Latin kings, disco people who've had their heyday, people who've just moved to the city, people who are there from Japan just visiting, damn it, everybody in the place. And drinking together, getting along. By that second drink, everybody's on that dance floor dancing, and it was so many people packed so tight in there. I can't tell you how many iterations of this night I saw people come out of their clothes in there, because it was that humid, it was that packed, and nobody wanted to leave. And I was one of those people. I'm not ashamed to say it.
That's all right. That's good.
Danny's
Tavern.
Best bar in America.
Wow. R.I.P. Bring Danny's Tavern back.
We want to, trust me. We do.
I have one more question.
Yes.
I'm going to pass it on to my colleagues here. So I want to ask, two questions. I'll wrap it into one question. How has, you talked about DJing and being in catalog rooms and working on the radio as kind of reliant upon physical media and physical music media. How has digital media and streaming kind of changed the game in different ways? And has that changed what you do as a music supervisor and how it's done, perhaps?
It makes my job easier as a music supervisor because what they're looking for is a high-res audio file to put to picture and while they're editing. So the two are really separate concerns. What I will say relative to DJing, be it on a radio show or in person, there are people who fool with digital files, but digital files, same as physical media, they can degrade over time. And even when you think about streaming services, right? I've noticed something happening relative to streaming services, and this also comes down to licensing, where you'll be listening to an album and it's there on Spotify or Tidal or what have you, and you go back to listen to it the next day and it's no longer there. Have y'all have seen this happen? Okay, that's due to sample clearance issues. That's due to people being willing to have their music on Spotify or not. Some record labels just forget that this artist exists and they don't even bother to renew their stuff and it just disappears. To this day, SOS Band, one of my favorite groups of all time, not on Spotify. I mean, everybody's heard Just Be Good to Me or Tell Me If You Still Care. Staple of R&B radio. It should be on streaming. So it affects things. I don't think other people will care about that as much as I do, but I care about it a lot, and I very much believe in buying physical media at the time because a lot of the tracks that I played during my heyday in college radio, a lot of those record labels don't even exist anymore. There's nobody overseeing digital rights management relative to those older catalogs, or they may not even own those rights anymore, and the artist might not be inclined to make that available publicly because maybe they're embarrassed about their work or they don't feel anyone cared. But if you have that physical, tangible form of media and you still own it, you can go listen to that whenever you want. You can play it for other people whenever you want. So I veer on the side of collect physical media and make sure you take care of it.
Awesome.
So you mentioned earlier that growing up, you found out that there was a bit of regionality to music. So how people from all over the South were listening to kind of similar music and how that really surprised you. Kind of going off of the question that Donovan just asked, do you think that now with increasing almost globalization of music with things like Spotify and Tidal, do you think that this regionality still exists or has it expanded more? I just wanted to get your thoughts on that.
I think the regionality still exists, but I love that it's become accessible to other people and that you're seeing other people in other places do what they want with that. A perfect example of this is drill rap. It originated in Chicago. We've seen it go from Atlanta to New York to France to Italy to London to Hong Kong. I love that. I'm here for it. I just want to see it keep proliferating in that way because the more these ideas and executed ideas and sounds get out there, the more other people are encouraged to be creative, which in turn helps the listener think about things that relate in their own life. Maybe it spurs them to do something creative that they never would have thought about before. There's nothing but good that could come in that. That's what music is meant to do. It's a positive force, and it's a unifier. It's the last one true unifying language that we have, that everybody speaks.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And then I want to know, for a 2022 version of maybe 1986 you that's trying to find their sound space, you got to look through these records and got to watch MTV. What would you tell a young version of yourself in this day and age? How would they go about discovering new music?
It's still the same, man. Honestly, talk to your friends. Talk to other people who like the same things as you. The biggest thing I did as a kid, and kids can still do this because, you got music blogs, Pitchfork, everything else. Your artists in interviews, artists that you love, I loved and respected Kurt Cobain. When he started saying he listened to Sonic Youth, Echo and the Bunnymen, Devo, well, I went and found out about those bands. And when I liked those bands, I found out what they listened to. It literally is like this unending, glorious web of things and rabbit holes that you can go down. And that really is what helped my feelings about music grow. And I know young kids do this. They pay attention to the artists that they like and what they like. Like Aaliyah, apparently back in the day, was on all these different, news shows and talked about her love of Trent Reznor and Nine Inch Nails. Who knew? But that sent me down a rabbit hole. Right? And in listening to Nine Inch Nails, Downward Spiral, or whatever, you can hear why Aaliyah was interested in Timbaland as a producer, because it overlaps. And most people back in the day, they weren't making those sorts of sonic leaps, but when you look at somebody like Tyler, the Creator, for instance, or Kay Tronada, or may he rest, Jay Dilla, that love of overlap and being open to what other people did is what helped inform their music and help them make even greater stuff.
Well, thank you so much, Jocelyn Brown, for joining us today.
Thank
where
you.
Can we find your more of what you work on and what you do?
I am in the process of building out my website. My business's name is Reality Club, and the website is realityclubforever.com. On our socials, we will just be Reality Club Gang, all one big word. And if you're looking for me, my website is just my full name, JocelynMichelleBrown.com.
Thank you so much. We're looking so forward to pretty much any sounds you help push out to the world. So thank you so much.
Well, thank you for humoring me. You guys asked some of the best questions. I had a wonderful time talking with you today. Thank you.
So much. All right, that'll be all.
Whack it.